This video will cover tiling methods. And the first method I'm going to show you is probably something you're familiar with if you've played this game quite a bit growing up. And it was a fairly popular way. The name of it is called the column method. And the idea of the column method is you make these columns of zones like this. And then what you would do is you can put rail in between them, like this. The reason this tiling method was used is because, number one, it's repeatable. So I can keep going left and right and repeating it, and then I can continuously keep building zones down. And number two is it used all of the space efficiently, right? So you're putting these columns, and then you're just putting rail on each side. You can also do this horizontally. It is also repeatable, and you can put rail in between like this. So both of these were very viable back in the day when we were playing this. However, there is an even better way to tile. Remember, residential zones only need 2 tiles of rail at most for them to develop. And those 2 tiles of rail just need to go to a valid destination. I have a lot of extra rail here, so is it possible to condense this tiling method into something even more dense than this? And the answer is yes. You make a square of residential blocks, and then normally you would just keep going, right? Left and right. But in this case, what I want you to do is move it 1 down and make another square. Move it 1 down, except I missed there, and make another square. And another square, and so forth. So it looks like a horizontal row method like this, except we kind of pushed it down in certain spots. Is kind of what it looks like. Once you get this, what you can do is in these like corners, you put 2 tiles of rail like this. Likewise, in these corners, you put more tiles. And then what you can do is to the left of the tiles you just made, you can then make more of these squares. And look at this. It kind of fits in with the other ones we made. What this tiling method is doing is it's using only 2 pieces of rail for each of the 4 zones that's surrounding it. So for example, if we look here, see there's 4 zones that are kind of using this rail, and all 4 of these combined are going to develop with just 2 tiles of rail, which is a significant improvement with what this column method does. And like I said earlier, it is very easily repeatable, and I can keep filling in the map in this way. And this is exactly what I did in the center of my map. So you would be doing this last, because when you're building, you're going to build the edges first, followed by your donut blocks. And the reason you want to do that is because, again, the center of the map will have the city center at the end. So that will develop really easily. We want to hold off on doing this until we get everything else built. And so once we get everything else built, then you can start working on the center and the outer gray area ring and tile in this method, which is exactly, again, what I did in my city. Now, as is, you can't have it be all residential zones, because if you did, then you wouldn't have a valid destination. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to destroy this square and put a commercial square. And we're going to kind of expand upon how this tiling method works by adding in commercial zones. And this is pretty easy to remember. Wherever you make a commercial square like this, you're going to go residential block, residential block, commercial block, residential block, residential block, commercial block. And so that pattern will keep going. 1 commercial block, 2 residential blocks. 1 commercial block, 2 residential blocks. So you see I keep going like this, and then commercial block. We'll explain why I'm doing it specifically like this here in a minute, but the way you would keep going with this pattern in other rows is you would find a commercial block that you just found, let's say this one. Go to the top left of it and follow the rail to the left. That will be where another commercial block has to be, right here. Same here. Top left of the commercial block, follow the rail left. We'll put one here. And notice what happens in the top row here. You have commercial block, residential block, residential block, commercial block. And so it will create the same pattern in this new row. And it's the pattern that I showed you when we first started it out. If you want to repeat this going down, you find the bottom right of the block, follow the rail to the right, and bulldoze the zones like this. And fill them in with commercial. Add some rail here. So here's a commercial block, bottom right, rail, go to the right of it, commercial zones. And you can keep repeating this if you make more rows. But the point of this method is you're providing just enough commercial zones to provide valid destinations to all these other residential zones. So notice, for example, right here, we have residential zone, follows the rail, has a valid destination. Residential zone follows the rail, gets to a valid destination. Residential zone starts the rail here, gets to a valid destination. And you can check all of these residential zones that are surrounding this 2x2 tile do in fact have a valid destination. What's really nice about this setup too is you are putting in more residential zones overall than commercial zones. And that's easy to see because we went one commercial block, then two residential blocks. That's really nice because, like I've preached before, it's really hard to keep commercial demand up. And so if you can build more residential zones, that will really help you out with that cause. So this is a really nice tiling layout, and it's really easy to repeat. Now, when it comes to building this tiling layout that I just showed you, there is actually an efficient, optimal way to do it. The way you want to do it is you want to start on the lowest parts of the map that you can start at. So what do I mean by that? Well, there's going to be residential donut blocks here. And so somewhere like maybe right here, you're going to start your first row and start going. But it's important to understand that you want to start, quote unquote, as low as possible on the map because of reasons I'm going to tell you in a minute, but you also want to go from right to left. So for example, if I start, let's say here, and let's just say like I had all this stuff built here, and so my first row is going to be here. The reason that I want to start low and work my way from right to left is for the following reason. Recall that when you are developing zones and you're wanting to get tops, the left half of a horizontal top and the top half of a vertical top are used in calculations. Remember the video we made about that earlier? About all the calculations being done in the top half and the left half of a vertical and horizontal top respectively? Well, we're going to try our best to take advantage of that. So if I'm starting off with this row method, you want to start with this residential zone. And then you're going to build this residential zone and hopefully get two highs and then make them top. But notice that since the left side of the residential zone is sticking out here, it allows it to get a lot more land value. And if you can get more land value, you have a better chance of A, developing this into a high, and B, getting it into a top. Now, I've said before that if you get two R highs together, they will become a top no matter what. So in the case of a residential top, it's more or less in this case, hey, keeping the left side open allows us a better chance to get a high. However, if this was a commercial zone, right, we learned before that in a commercial top, you have to get orange or higher on the left or the top C5 high for them to top. And so starting from the right and working way left will allow the left to be sticking out to where you can put as much park as you can around it to try and get it to develop. And then once you do this, you would then go above it and do this, and then this left half has park. And then you would proceed to go to the next part of the row right here, develop this, then develop this. Develop this, then develop this. And your overall goal is to get tops. So since you have 4 squares here, what's really nice about this tiling pattern is you can get an opportunity to get 2 tops per square. You're usually trying to get horizontal tops since I'm telling you to work your way from right to left, but it's not a big deal at all if you end up with 2 vertical tops. It's not always going to be the case that 2 horizontal tops are going to form for you. So in the center of the map, you should be able to get mostly horizontal tops, but then towards like the outer ring or outer center, it's not going to be as easy because land values are going to start decreasing. But I'll show you some situations and actual footage in a little while about problems I've ran into that you're going to have to think outside the box for. Okay? But anyway, you would keep doing this, right? So you would build this zone here, followed by this zone here, followed by this zone. And you're building them in that order, assuming that they are turning into tops, okay? But let's just say that you instead went from left to right. And so let's just assume that these 3 squares were still here, and you're going to build this square next. So the reason I stressed that you need to go from right to left is because if I'm going to go for a horizontal top next, and I place a zone here, then, and let's just assume it's a commercial zone, then in order to get a horizontal top on it, I would have to build the next zone there. But do you notice that to the left of this commercial zone is all of these residential zones, right? But if these zones weren't here, I could have put park. And so by going from left to right, you're giving the horizontal tops less park to put around it and possibly get it to develop into not only a high, but to make it top, especially for these commercial zones. See, if I went from right to left and I'm like, okay, I want to get these to be a top, okay, not only does it have all this, but it has all the land value in front of it too. There's nothing beside it. This zone right here is not used in the calculation for a top, so it doesn't matter that it's squished between all these zones. As long as you can get this into a high, then you can move here and try to get this into a high, but then this zone has as much open space as possible. Does that make sense? So that's why you want to start from right to left. Now let's just go and assume that you are building and you don't get a horizontal top. Now why would you not be able to get, let's say, this zone to develop into a high, even if there's maybe nothing around it? Well, the reason for that is because of the land value tiles that we've talked about before. Remember, when it comes to land value tiles, there's these bonus tiles that I talked about. And I kind of preached then that you really want to try getting as many bonus tiles as you can, but when you're tiling in this way, it's going to work out sometimes where this zone may not be sitting on hardly any bonus tiles or any. And so then it would probably develop into an upper, and you won't really have anything you can do, right? Because you don't have any bonus tiles. That's not to say that it can't develop into a high without bonus tiles. So if this is stubborn and does not want to turn into a C5 high, there's a couple things you can try and do. You could just leave it into a fully developed C upper, and then you can try to get a top like right here as a horizontal top, or right here as a vertical top. Your goal is to really try your best to get at least one top in each square. Now, that's not to say you have to follow that all the way to the T. Your ultimate goal is to get 2 tops per square, but towards the corners and like far edges, it might become a little difficult to get all of these to either be 2 tops or even 1 top. But always strive to get at least 1 top per square. In the center, you should be able to get 2 easily in each square. Then as you move out, okay, you should still be doing good, but 1 top should still be doable. And then there might come a point where you can't get any. And actually, for this map here, it was kind of around here on the map for me where I was struggling to get any tops in the squares. So you don't have to be perfect about it, but do your best to, again, try to get at least 1 top. I would probably say that if this was a upper, you definitely probably want to just go for this first and then see if this top one becomes a top. But if it's stubborn too because of, let's say, this tile is sitting on crappy land value tiles, you could build this zone, then this zone, and try to get a vertical top here. It's not the end of the world. I have plenty of vertical tops in my city, and it was for reasons similar to this. But yeah, this is what you want to do. Right to left, start on the bottom, and work your way over. And by doing this, you're leaving the left half where all the calculations are done sticking out so that you can put as much park around it as you can. Now, one question you might have is, all right, I can understand why I want to go from right to left, because I'm trying to keep the left half of the top sticking out. But couldn't I get the left half of this top sticking out by starting at the very top row and working my way left? And the answer is, technically you could for a horizontal top, but that's not true for a vertical top. So if I'm building in this tiling method like this, so let's just kind of make some zones here. So we're doing our pattern, 2 residentials, 1 commercial, 2 residentials like this. And then let's just say the top row is done and we're gonna move our way down. So rather than going from the bottom up, we're gonna go from the top down. Let's just say that you cannot get a horizontal top here because one of these is just in a bad land value position. It's just destined to be a fully developed upper. Now, remember, a fully developed upper is okay, has more population than an industrial zone, but we want to get as many tops as we can. However, sometimes we just got to take what we get. So let's just assume like this zone here is a upper, fully developed, and this zone here turned into a fully developed C5 high. Well, then what I would say is, okay, I can't get a horizontal top, so I'm going to get or go for the vertical top. Since this one's an upper, then I'm going to have to go for this to be the top. But do you see what happens here? The problem is, if we're trying to get a vertical top, we only have a little bit of park to work with here. And so if we don't have much open area to fill up with park, we're not as likely to get this into the orange or higher so that these 2 commercial zones become a top. Now, if this was a residential zone, remember, residential zones just need to be 2 R highs next to each other and they will turn into tops no matter what. So in the case of a residential top, this isn't as big of a deal But with the commercial top, it is, because it completely relies on having high land value for it to top. Remember, commercial zones are stingier when it comes to topping. But all of this is surrounded with zones. And so if it's surrounded with zones, we have no way of providing it any more land value. You could try bulldozing this and doing this, but you're risking the possibility of not getting your C upper back, because maybe this zone here had some land value tiles that pushed this just enough to be an upper. You see what I'm saying? And so if I had worked from the bottom up, so let's say I'm working on this zone and I've already worked from the bottom up, then notice that if I want to get this to be a vertical top, so let's just say we're trying to get this to be a vertical top, I have a lot more open area around it to try and give it park, to try and raise the land value. So that's the reason why you don't want to go from the top down, even if you work your way from right to left still. Because if you have the situation where you have to build a vertical top instead, it's going to get smushed up like this and not have many parks around it. So as far as doing this goes, you find the lowest point, you start building, and then you go from right to left. Now, once you're ready to do another row, you need to, again, start on the very rightmost spot. So, for example, this map kind of angles farther and farther away. So what I would do when I'm trying to plan for the next row is I would first do a pre-build, right? And so I would kind of be like, okay, here's a commercial block, so I need to top left, follow the rail, another commercial block. And then I would start doing my pattern like this so that I have an idea of what I need to build next. And then what I would do is I would destroy these zones that kind of helped me. And this is where I would start next. So I would build this zone here, develop it, then build this zone and hopefully get a high. Then I would build this zone, followed by this zone. You could do these two as a high as well, since you only have 3. And this is also a good example of not everything's going to go the way you want it to. So this tiling pattern can't happen the whole time as nicely as you want it to, especially by the waterfront. Notice I can't fit anything here anymore. So you have the option to maybe move it down if you want. Maybe it will help give you a valid destination somewhere else. I don't know. Another alternative you could do is you could put a landfill here. And that's what I did a few times in my city. Is I came across this situation and said, you know what, if I put a landfill there, I could get my 4x4 or my 4 zone square and get my 2 tops that way. So always just improvise and do a little bit of modifications if need be. But what you could do then is you could build like this, and then you say, okay, this followed by this. Then we go and say, okay, we need commercial zones next, so I'm going to build this zone followed by this zone. This zone followed by this zone. And if I run into any problems, I'm just going to make a vertical top to the best of my ability, if that is all I can get. And then you just keep going, this to this, working our way from right to left. And then once you go all the way as far as you can, you then say, okay, let's map out the next row. Map it out first before you actually build to make sure everything's aligned the way you want it to. You can see that I'm getting it all together, and then I would bulldoze all of these and prepare myself for building starting right here. So just hopping into my city real quick, you can see in the center of this map that it does in fact go commercial block, residential block, residential block. commercial block, and so forth. But one thing to understand again is towards the donut blocks, you notice I kind of get away from that pattern, and I'm just kind of getting away from the tiling method in general that I've showed you. So that's going to happen. It's not going to fit perfectly. So one of the biggest things I would recommend doing is you want to plan ahead before you just kind of go and build in this sort of way, because you might start tiling and tiling and tiling, but then you might come across a situation where you could have made more room for other zones if you had built the previous ones in a certain way. Getting a layout ahead of time is going to help tremendously. And that's actually what I did for this map. I actually had like a blueprint, and I figured out where I wanted to put everything first. And when I was building the center and outer ring with this row method, I essentially had my instructions in front of me, and I just started building. In my city here, my first row is actually just this skinny row here. I started with this residential zone or top, and I did this and worked my way down. And then I started back up here for the next row, and I worked my way this way. So again, when you do this method, plan ahead and expect the outer edge of the gray area to not follow exactly with how the column or the tiling method I just showed you goes. Okay. The next thing I'd like to do is show you one other tiling method, and it's actually somewhat better overall than the second tiling method. So the first one was the column method that we've all seen. The second one was this like these angled rows. But there's a third one that's kind of unique, and I think it looks really cool. But there's a big catch to it, which is why I never used it. And it looks like this. If I make 3 tiles of rail like this, you can then build a top, a commercial top right there, a residential top, residential top, residential top. And so what happens is you get 4 tops around 3 tiles of rail. And what's really cool about this is it's repeatable. So I can, not like that, I can do this, build my tiles of rail, build like this. And as you can see, it's kind of melding into itself because it's very repeatable. Now, again, I said there's a huge catch to this, and I'm going to show you why here in a minute, but let's just kind of build some and appreciate how packed in this really does look, right? See that? And then we'll do one more here, just so we've got a decent view of it. Look how packed this is. There's hardly any rail. We do use 3 tiles, but it seems like it's a lot more dense than the previous one. But the big catch is this. If you notice this vertical top, the bottom of it has no rail. This horizontal top has no rail on this zone here. This horizontal top has no rail on this zone here, and so forth. And so it turns out that for this tiling pattern, you have to have all tops for it to develop into this. Because if this was an upper, then this would be like a dead zone. Because you can only have this free of tile if these two become a top, right? So if this is like an upper or a mid, then you have this like zone here that can't do anything. And so that's why it's a big problem, because to expect every one of the zones to become highs followed by a top is near impossible. But the reason I'm actually telling you about this tiling method is because it's really decent to use on an island map. You can get away with it a bit more on an island map because island maps have no corners or edges. It's like just the center of the map and the outer ring for the most part. And so it's a little bit easier to get this tiling method to work on those kind of maps. And so if you ever do an island map, I would highly recommend you just give this a try. And I actually did try this out myself with this tiling method for fun. Alright, so here is my island megalopolis, and this is the tiling method, the third tiling method I just showed you, and look how packed these zones are in, and it looks really, really cool. But again, the problem with this tiling method is it's extremely difficult to maintain throughout. So you'll notice, for example, right here, I have a windmill gift. Why do I have just a random windmill gift there? It's because where the windmill is, I could not get a high to develop. And if I can't get a high to develop, then I can't get a top. And so at the time, because this was a few years ago that I made this, I was like, well, I have to put something there. So a gift seemed like a reasonable place or a reasonable thing to put. And you can see there's quite a few gifts here. Most of them are kind of on the edges, but unfortunately, even in the center of the map, like right here, I cannot or could not get a high. So yes, it looks really cool. Yes, it definitely packs the zones in more, but it's a lot more difficult to maintain and continue being successful with. So here's the whole map. You know, towards the edges, you can be a little more open about how you build. You don't have to follow this, but for the most of the map, you do have to repeat this layout. And like I said, the gifts are just where I couldn't repeat the layout pattern at, like right here too. The next thing that I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some video footage of me actually building using the row method. So the row method, the angled rows, the second method I showed you, is the best method of finishing off your city for the center. Alright, so in this build, I've already built a few rows, but notice that when I got to the next row, I started on the very right, which is what I have built so far, and I'm gonna start working my way left. And right here, what I'm doing is I'm making my 4x4 squares for the land value. So remember, you can start in the corner and make these squares. And the whole point of me doing this is I'm trying to figure out where the bonus land value is every time I'm building. I want to keep track of that. And then it will help me position a police department if I need to. But I've had some of these tiles kind of spread out randomly in the map, so I wouldn't have to keep counting from the corner again. So that's what I'm doing here, so that I can kind of get myself ready. And so then, all right, build a residential zone. Notice that I put tile of park where it's not going to be in any of the land value tiles for the development of this zone, because I'm trying to give it as many land value tiles as I can so that it has the best chance of becoming a high. So it has a lot of bonus land value, so we'll just skip around here. We don't have to watch it develop, but I do get a high. So like I said before, what I'm going to do is I filled in the land value tiles that affect the next one, and I'm going to let it develop like this. We'll skip a little bit. It develops really nicely, so I'm going to get a top. Don't need any of the rails there. So I should work my way right there. Like I said, we want to work on our next one. Give it some rail, skip around a bit. We get our high, and likewise, we move on and we get our high right here. Okay, so I'll skip a little bit. We'll watch it develop. Like so. Nice. Move on to the next one. Forgot some park there. Let's see what happens. Oh, do you notice that? It turned into an upper, not a high. So here's an example of where not everything's going to go the way you want it to. So we're going to have to improvise here. Since I'm in the center of the map for the most part, I know I can push it to become a high. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to redraw my land value tiles. And do you notice why we got an upper? It's because the center tile of the residential zone is sitting on that little square that is barely sticking out. And recall when we talked about land value tiles is the bonus land value tiles is single-handedly the most important of all the tiles surrounding it. But when we put the residential zone there, it gets no bonus tiles. So that's not surprising to me why it turned into an upper, because it's only getting a few land value tiles that are adjacent to it. So what are you going to do, or what should you do if you come into this situation, which is, by the way, one of the worst case scenarios? Well, you can do a trick that I've learned to try and get more land value tiles. The first thing is I'm going to move some of this rail to get more park there. That counts towards it, and that's probably not going to be enough to develop it. But I'm also going to try another trick. I'm pretty sure I'm going to try the trick I'm thinking of. So let's see if I do it. Okay, so I put a police department right next to it where it's not in the land value tile, and it's still not going to develop. Let's just fast forward here. Yeah, so it does happen. The trick that I'm going to do is actually destroy the left half of this R top. Now you might be like, why did I do that? Well, the first thing before I tell you why I did that is just because you do get tops to develop, it doesn't mean you can't touch them anymore. You can do whatever you want when you're building. So in this case, what I did is I said, okay, some of the land value tiles are in where the left half of that R top was. So I'm hoping that if I bulldoze it, I can get enough land value for this upper to develop. And then my hope is I can go back and fix that R top so that it's an R high. So that's what I'm doing here. So I bulldoze it, and then I start building, and let's see if it was enough to make it into a high. It was. So I improvised and I bulldozed a previous square's zone so that I could give enough land value for this to develop. Thinking outside the box like this is something you're going to have to be able to do. It's not just going to be go from right to left. Sometimes you're going to run into these situations where you have bad land value tiles, so you need to find other ones somehow. And in this case, what I did was I just temporarily destroyed half of my top, and notice I'm going to go back and I'm going to hopefully have it develop back into a high. And it should develop back into a high because it's sitting in a good position as far as land value tiles go. And so it's developing back into a high. I got my upper into a high, and I'm going to recover this R top. So that's a really good situation, and everything that I wanted to happen happened. So we'll go ahead and fast forward a little bit here. So I get the top back. I work my way back here, as you can see, and I get an R high, which becomes a top. So you're going to have situations where it is just going to be nice and do what you want. So that's what I did here, is I just kept going, and I'm pretty sure that becomes a high. So then I move on to the next one, and as you can see, that's turning into a high. And again, you still see I'm mapping out the 4x4 land value tiles so that I can keep track of how to optimize and maximize each zone that I put down. And so now notice that, okay, it's time to put commercials down because I did 2 R blocks. So skipping around here, I get another commercial top, I believe. Is it going to top? Yep. So then I start in the top right, and I keep going. skip around, get another top. Now it's time for residentials again. This residential has okay. It's an okay position. Notice it only has 2 bonus tiles. Can you see that? So it may develop okay. We'll see. Skipping around, we do. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull up some footage of this build a little bit later. It's in the same row. Okay, so I've pulled up this, and here's what I want to show you. So do you notice that I get a C upper? Okay, so that's going to be actually a similar situation as the previous one that I showed you, where it's sitting on a really bad land value tile. And so it's just developing into an upper. And you will see here in a minute that I'm going to reconstruct the land value tiles. But one thing else I want to point out in this kind of picture here is you notice that I got some R uppers instead of an R top kind of to the bottom left of the commercial zone that I'm developing. And that's an example of me that did everything I could to try and get a top, but I couldn't. However, I did get one residential top in that square, so I'm happy. But you can actually use the uppers and mids that you get to your advantage if you do get them. Because if you do get them, like I did here, if I skip here, you'll notice that I bulldozed those uppers. And the reason I bulldozed those uppers is because I can then move the transportation for this top more down and off of the land value tiles for this commercial zone, so I have more tiles for it to possibly turn into a high. And again, you can kind of see after I mapped out these tiles that this commercial zone is in the worst possible case because it's not going to get any bonus tiles. However, what I'm pretty sure I did was I did the same trick if I skip where I kind of temporarily destroy a residential top from before so I can get it to develop. And then I'm going to go back after it develops and get my high back. Okay. And again, I want to kind of stress when building this way, there's going to be a lot of different looks that you're going to see. So when I say looks, I mean different problems. In the case that I showed you here, the common problem that you run into is you get an upper, not a high. So what I would do first if I were you is try this trick here where you temporarily destroy a previous top, half of it, not the whole thing, to see if you can get your high. If you can't, then maybe there's other things you could try. There are maybe 1 or 2 instances where I was able to get away with destroying things below it, which you wouldn't think is very good because things that are below are surrounded by a lot of zones, but I was able to actually get 1 or 2 instances of that working for me. You're going to have to think outside the box sometimes. Don't let it get to you, okay? The more you do this, the more looks you're going to get, the more ideas you're going to come up with as far as trying to get tops. I showed you one of the most common ones that I was able to do to help myself. The whole point of me showing you this footage is that it's not going to be just A to B, really simple. In some situations it is, but sometimes you're just going to have to work really hard for it. And sometimes you'll work really hard for it and it's still going to be stingy, and that's when you kind of accept your fate that it's just going to be maybe an upper. Just like the 2 R uppers that you seen earlier, okay, I did everything I could at the time and I couldn't get them, so I'm going to use it to my advantage and I can bulldoze them as I please so I can get more land value. And that about wraps it up for tiling methods. So let's just kind of recap here. There's 3 tiling methods you can do. You can do the most popular tiling method, which is the column method. If you're just trying to get a megalopolis, this method is actually okay to do. But I would recommend if you do the column method that you do get all of your donut blocks into tops. So I made a video on how to do that quite easily. But if you have all these donut blocks as tops and you fill the middle with just a column method, you should easily be able to get a megalopolis. If, however, you want to go past megalopolis and break the game's population, the single best way to do this is using this like jagged horizontal column, it's not really a column, row. It's horizontal row method. This is single-handedly a superior way to get higher populations. And then if you are dinking around on an island map, this is definitely still good on an island map, but you might be crazy and try the third method I showed you where you have to get all tops. So do whatever works best for you.